Failure is not an option. How many times have you heard it? However, even the best have failed. This is Fail, Inspiring Resilience, where we celebrate stories of vulnerabilities, adversities, and strength, shared by exceptional people to create a more resilient society. Because failure is indeed not an option, it is required to succeed.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to this third episode of this live streaming, live chat that Fail Inspiring Resilience is organizing to connect all the people that are home like us, COVID-19, etc. All the events got canceled. So we're really trying to create with this platform this new initiative, bridging people, bringing people together, and always talking about what we like the most. And my name is Francesco, and I'm a postdoctoral associate at MIT in chemical engineering. And today I will host this episode together with Jenny.
Hi, my name is Jenny, and I'm a first-year student at Harvard Medical School. So if you are new to Fail, Fail is a platform we created to normalize and examine failures. And we just wanted to create a space to talk openly about different ways in which we can be versatile and resilient in the face of failure, which we believe is inevitable and comes in a lot of different forms, personal, professional, and sometimes even on the community level. So today we're going to have a speaker who was on stage with us last year, and Francesco is going to do a more proper introduction for us. But I'll just let you know that we are going to have questions and comments from the audience throughout the event. So if you have any comments you want to make, just leave them in the chat on Facebook or YouTube.
Absolutely. So as Jenny said, we are extremely happy today to have Muriel Médard, who was a speaker at Fail in the event that we hosted in the fall 2018. And Muriel Médard is a professor at MIT in the Department of Electrical Engineering and Computer Science. And beyond being an amazing professor and inventor, innovator, she also shares something that all the people that come at Fail have together. They are extremely great human beings and inspiring people that really were capable of teaching us a lot and teaching to the whole community at MIT and beyond what are real values and how we can be resilient together. And as we mentioned, Muriel already gave a talk. And before any question, I think it would be great to go through just a very short video of highlights from her talk, so to put things in context and see where are we going to start and move from the story that Muriel already shared with us.
I'm a brand new instructor, and I have a completely unreasonable expectation of what it means to teach at this level. And I'm trying to teach the way I would have liked to be taught, which, remember, was actually not going to class. All these different things that seem to accumulate one on top of the other were actually separable items that individually were manageable. And I think once I realized they were all individually manageable, and I could have managed them differently and not just felt like they were all piling up on top of me and probably constructively interfering so that, each, as opposed to having 1 + 1 be 2, it's like, 4 or something like that. I could have dealt with it.
Yeah, so absolutely. So as you've seen, things fail all the time. We failed at having the audio in the event. But as we mentioned before, before starting the event, we're very comfortable with failure, so we're absolutely not worried about it. But we apologize for with the audience. And so, like as you heard, like Muriel shared the story about her first experience, basically about teaching a class. And we're gonna have follow up a lot on this and ask you more details about the story, also for the people that didn't have a chance to be there the day, but also watching the talk online. But the first question that I really want to ask you is, and this is becoming kind of a routine with all the guests that we have, like what made you accepting the invitation to come and speak at Fail, and where do you see the value of sharing failures with a community of students and, you know, young professionals and in general, people of all kinds?
Yes, thank you, Francesco. So first of all, I think it's brilliant to, you know, when you asked me to participate in this, my first reaction was like, this is a brilliant idea. I think, you know, we learn obviously from our failures, I think far more than from our successes. Not that we don't relish the successes, but, you know, when you think back of things you learn to do or not do, it's usually from your failures. The successes are sort of more a corollary to the things you learned in your failures. But there's a lot of pressure, I think, to appear as gliding effortlessly through life and career with no failures, with no setbacks. And indeed, you know, it becomes almost a requisite of the narrative. That you just hop from, you know, success to success, that, you know, you come up with amazing ideas that then quickly become implemented and applicable or popularized or recognized. Whereas, you know, the reality is far, far more messy. And so it's great to be able to have a forum where the point is to share how you learned and how you actually evolved as not just a professional, but as a person. Of course, the two are very intertwined, which I think is another aspect that Fail recognizes and that I like having highlighted, because very often that is, you know, those are presented in a completely separate fashion, you know, as though they were really two different aspects, which to some extent they are, but by and large they're not.
Yeah, and also like one of the most interesting aspects is like, although everybody recognizes, at least internally, the importance of this path towards, you know, a success or towards a discovery or something that just, you know, eventually worked out, nobody really shares what's before. So like offering a platform to share what's before that event that actually is worth sharing because you're proud of that type of success or the type of event, right? That everybody tends to hide all the struggles and the efforts before, like maybe because they are afraid to feel weak, etc. But, you know, I think it was important to create a platform for that. So thank you very much for recognizing it.
And speaking of paths, sort of from the talk, one question that came up is, you mentioned that you grew up in a family of academics, and as you saw your parents do the work they did, you never thought that that's the kind of work you saw yourself doing. Yes. But you're now an established educator and researcher, you know, definitely living the academic life. Yes. Well, we were wondering what led to that decision ultimately, and also how your perspective on being an educator has changed over time.
That's a good question. Yeah, I think in the talk, I really make it sound like I had a very grim view of academia. And I think it comes across that way because it sort of was true. You know, and not because I didn't like the people in it, I very much did. But it seemed like a fairly relentless pursuit. It didn't necessarily seem like a pursuit to me that was compatible with having a family, which was priority for me. It looked like an extremely risky pursuit in a way. You know, getting a job, having to go for tenure, basically finding out some years in whether you get to keep your job or not, which of course is the case in every job really, but it's in a more extreme way in academia, you know, running after grant money, which is necessary of course in an engineering field, because you need to do certain things, and that takes money. So it seemed like certainly interesting, and I always had a great deal of respect for the people engaged in it. It wasn't like a respect for the occupation, for the profession, or the community. It just looked like a bit of a slog, frankly. I ended up going into academia because I found myself a couple of years into my postdoctoral life, trying to figure out what to do in myself. And basically, one of the things I didn't touch on in the talk was, when I graduated, I basically decided I should go to work because my then husband was going to go to grad school, and we had a child and a mortgage, and somebody had to pay the bills. And so I applied to 2 places, and they were chosen partially because they were great places to work out, BBN and Lincoln Lab, and also largely because they were close to my daughter's preschool. So this is not exactly a smart career move. And let me tell everybody on this who's watching or listening, do not say that I recommended that you do this. And then, I discovered that I liked the research. I discovered I really liked working with students. I was fortunate to be able to work with just a couple fantastic students when I was at Lincoln Lab. And I also discovered that, the tough part of having to write proposals and raise money is not something that's unique to academia. Pretty much you're always going to have to do that in any engineering area. You're going to have to raise money, whether it's internally, whether it's externally, with the success of your product. You're not going to duck that. And that's also that it's fair game, that I shouldn't be afraid of it, because that was part of what I was trained to do, was to develop new technologies, new ideas, and try to gain support for them internally or externally. And so, it became clear to me that maybe, some of the aspects of academia that I hadn't thought I would necessarily enjoy, particularly the supervision of students, something I would really enjoy, and some of the aspects of academia that I was dreading, I was going to have to deal with anyway. So might just as well go and do it.
Yeah, and I think that also speaks to this idea of you having a set way of thinking about certain things, and then your life takes you somewhere and you realize new things along the way.
Yes.
Which also very much ties up into how we think about failure, I think.
Yes.
Yeah, so absolutely, yes. I think something that you also touched, like now during this first answer, but also during the very brief highlight that we showed, is that there's always many factors you need to manage. It's not just your life runs on one one rail, and you need to what is my job now, and then I'm gonna pick a job and do this, and so you need to manage a family. There's other things that may happen, like in your life. There's so many factors that you need to manage at the same time, simultaneously. And I think something that you really, one of the most important messages from your talk, at least for me, was like learning how to manage things individually,
Yes.
instead of having them piling up and having that feeling of being overwhelmed by them in a way that you'll never be able to fix the problem, and you just spend 5 minutes on one, then you get confused and you want to do something else. Like you never really face problems if you don't learn how to prioritize and how to tackle things individually. And I think everybody at any stage of life struggle with this. Since you apparently had a way of figuring out these problems, like how do you do a million things, maintaining control without going in that tunnel that feels very dark and it feels very lonely, where you feel like you're overwhelmed and you cannot manage what you really want to do. Do you have any recommendation for us?
It's a good question. I think it's not that, you don't get in over your head. I mean, we all do at some, and as I said in the talk, it'd be great to say, oh, I made that mistake and I never made it again. And, I'm totally over it. No, you repeat them, just more mildly, it's like an inoculation. You don't get it as badly as the first time. Certainly trying to deal with the things item by item helps, because otherwise I think that's when you get overwhelmed. There's a triage, also some acceptance about the things that are not going to get done or not going to get done now. I think that's helpful. I try to look at the things that I do manage and try to really get happy about the things that did get managed. I think that it's also looking at the good things that happened and, acknowledging the bad things, but trying not to delve into them, or also the idea that you can postpone, that you can push certain things to later and deal with them later. I find that, if it's really postponement and not avoidance, it's very helpful, because then I say, okay, here's all the stuff I need to do. I'm going to do these couple of things now. And the reason I'm going to do these couple of things now is maybe I have the energy for it. Maybe there's a window of opportunity because somebody can help me with it. And these are the things I'm going to postpone. And this is maybe the things that I'm just never going to get to. And doing that triage, I think, is to me is very helpful. Do I do it perfectly all the time? No. But does it work pretty well most of the time? Yeah, actually it does. It does. So,
And I think it's important to acknowledge that, and also to reassure people that things get better over time, right? in managing difficult situations, in managing difficult scenarios, right? Can you say that?
I think a lot of them do. I think it does. And also to some extent, you become a little more inure, right? Because you may have seen things which looked like, all of a sudden, like, a bunch of papers don't get in, or a bunch of grants don't get in. And then you look back and you go, oh, that's happened to me before. And then it turned around. So, it may not happen again that it turns around, but most likely it will, and I think that certainly that helps, having been through troughs, and everybody goes through academic troughs. I think that helps.
Yeah, and I think, as you mentioned, like, it's super important not just to focus on that one thing that didn't go well, but also celebrating all the others, every small things that actually you achieve. Like, I see a tendency in so many people around me, but also sometimes myself, not celebrating when actually, some accomplishment, because you're already thinking, okay, what's next? What's the next problem I have? Like, instead of just for a second sitting down, looking yourself at the mirror and say, yes, like, we made it, like, or looking at your colleagues and your friends and say, we made it together, like, we did something. That it's super important to celebrate also those moments, instead of just always being caught up in the idea of productivity. You need to achieve this and that. Like, if you don't take time to celebrate, I think you also lose the enthusiasm towards what you're doing, and then you lose also the energy to fight for what you're doing.
And I think one of the things that I find helpful, and I mean, this is going to sound really stupid, but I find helpful just so the fact that a cake came out well, that
of course.
That I love the new cushion. I mean, things like that, which sound really trite, and like something pulled out of like a Good Housekeeping, low-end magazine. I love that stuff, and it's like, okay, grant didn't get in. Another one will down the road, and the sofa looks fantastic, and
Absolutely.
That's true. And I was also thinking, as Francesco was asking for reassurance from you as a joke, but also it is true that you, as an educator, as someone who interfaces with students all the time, you're kind of in contact with not just your own failures, but all of the failures of your students. And I'm curious sort of how, yeah, right. And has that changed how you look at failure? Like, is there a lesson you've learned from that, or?
There is. I think a lot of students now feel that there's a very high level of competition, and that because the competition is so keen, any misstep or missing of an opportunity is disastrous. That somehow these are unrecoverable failures. And I think that it's generally not true. I see a lot of students beating themselves up for having missed something or other, which means that as they go along, they actually might miss the chance to, do something a little that looks a little weird, might be a little risky, but will work out, and this is the time to do it. But yeah, I see a lot of students feeling often that they can't give themselves any slack. And, I think particularly now, with a lot of uncertainty around careers, around job offers, around the state of whole industries for that matter, I'm talking to former students, former postdocs, or, even people who were not students or postdocs, but sort of informally seeing me as a mentor at other institutions. And there's this feeling of, what do I do? This isn't what I had planned on. And, I can't tell them, oh, don't worry about it, it'll be fine, because A, that's glib. B, I don't know. I can tell them it might not be that taking a step sideways right now, not doing exactly what you thought you were going to do, is necessarily as deleterious as you think. Because A, everybody's in the same boat, and B, a little bit of randomization is not necessarily bad. So I think that right now, this idea also of being confronted, not necessarily by personal failure in the sense of, I was trying to do X and, I messed it up, like, I just misstepped, but I had a plan X and it doesn't look like X is going to happen, not necessarily because I didn't do what I thought was required to get to there, but because it's maybe not a feasible or likely plan anymore. I think that looking at that right now is very important. I think a lot of people are in that situation.
Yes, absolutely. So this is actually a great segue to something that I had in mind to ask you anyway, but since you already mentioned, it's really perfect. Like, this is one of these clear situations, like when coronavirus hits, something really unpredictable, right? Nobody 1 year ago would imagine that we were, like, basically everything now would happen online. We would be social distancing and wearing masks. Like, nobody could see it, okay? And this is something that also happens in labs other times, like not to the whole world, so that not everybody talk about it, but maybe sometimes in your own life, some very critical things happen and you need to change everything. Plans change. So my question would be, sometimes you hear that you really need to focus on something if you want to be successful, if you want to have a chance to get things done in that particular field, in that particular aspect, okay? But at the same time, this is one of these clear situations in which probably being a person that is willing to change, is willing to reinvent yourself, and capable of imagining a plan B, or just already having a plan B and actually executing it, because now is the right time to do it, would actually be extremely beneficial, like being that type of person. So what would be, from somebody with your experience, like a recommendation for students in general, trying to manage the focus on something because that's where you need to invest your energy, and where your bet is to become successful at what you like and what you love. But also having a plan B, so keeping, you know, a part of yourself engaged with something else, some of your passions, another work, a plan B. Like, what would it be the perfect combination, if you have any recommendation about that?
That's a very good question. I think to some extent, you know, one of the reasons I brought this up in my talk is that I've been very successful at something that was not plan A or plan B, and that I discovered was my plan C. Now, it sounds weird because that's, for most of the people in my profession, that was their plan A all along. So,
Yeah.
you know, decided to do that this later. It wasn't something I was looking to do. I think that there's so many things that are interesting. I mean, there was never to me something where I found that I thought I could only be happy doing a single thing, that there was only a single thing that could make me happy. And I think, you know, feeling some satisfaction from doing what you're doing well, not in the sense that you're a perfectionist and it'll drive you crazy if you don't do it, but just say, okay, I'm doing this and I'm going to do a good job and it's going to be worthwhile. And, you know, I may end up doing something completely different, but I want to be able to look back on this 2 or 3 years in my life when I was working on this project and say, you know what, that's pretty good. and, you know, whatever that project is. I mean, the reason I ended up in academia actually is, so as I mentioned, I only looked at a couple of places and I got several job offers between those two places because they had several openings. And I took the only one that had nothing to do with my PhD. Now, again, people on the audience, don't do this, okay? But I was like, okay, I didn't know if I wanted to work long term. You know, I had a family. I thought maybe I wanted to stay at home. And I thought, I'll learn something new. And this is my chance. And I'm just going to take this project. And, you know, it was a project that was very high risk, probably had like a police line, do not cross around it if you wanted to have a career. But, you know, it was clearly an interesting project. And I wanted to work on it and see what happened. And the fact is, like, you know, if that project hadn't worked, it's not like I would be unemployable, right? I could get a job somewhere else eventually. It was not, you know, not a disaster. And that project went really, really well, like completely beyond what I thought it would go, where it would go. And so it suddenly put me in a situation where I was able, and then at the same time, the work I had done during my PhD, which at the time when I was doing my PhD was like massively obscure. As a matter of fact, my advisor told me, don't go into that, you know. And I remember telling him, he was like, it's okay if it doesn't work out, you know, like I'm not looking for an academic position. So it's kind of fun, don't worry about it. You know, I'll do something else. Don't worry, I can get a job somewhere, you know. That also simultaneously took off. So I had a bizarre concordance of my PhD work really taking off, like people noticing it a few years after I had done it. And the work I was doing at the time really taking off. So, but it was a totally bizarre concordance, especially because the work I was doing at the time had nothing to do with my PhD. So all of a sudden, like I was a hot item. I had not thought of myself as a hot item, as a researcher. And I was like, oh, you know, what do I do? You know? So, you know, the point is, if I had stayed in industry, I think I would have been happy. If I had, even within industry, had different career paths, I think I could have been happy. I mean, there's so many interesting things. And I think that feeling that you can do a variety of different interesting things is very worthwhile. And even if, you know, I had ended up in a job that was a bit boring, you know, there's enough volunteer opportunities and things to do that can be super interesting. So, you know, feeling there's a lot of fun stuff, I think is worthwhile. I mean, it sounds a bit simplistic, but, you know.
Now, I really think like a super important take-home message from what you just shared is that, and that I think everybody can relate to this, is like we'll never work on something that is exactly what we had in mind in our ideal scenario of what is our job, the perfect job, doesn't exist. The perfect anything doesn't exist. Like, it just doesn't exist. So you will always need to accept something that you don't like too much. Exactly, that was not what I exactly had in mind. But but the real value here, and what you shared, is that we always need to do our best. I think in doing what we have, doing our best to make it work. Also, because eventually, if you really invest time and passion or anything, you find you find yourself also like somehow to fall in love with it, because you're just spending sometimes enough time with things that make you appreciate them and understand them enough, so that your effort there can become meaningful. So it's very important that we accept that the ideal job doesn't exist, but we always need to do our best to make it work.
And even if you end up with a job that was absolutely not in your that you thought was not in your career path, you may actually enjoy it, and at least for the time when you do it, and learn a lot. I mean, another thing that was a little unusual about my path is, like, usually people in the summers were all getting like internships at very prestigious companies, and like, I took a couple of summers and taught aerobics. I used to be a aerobics instructor, certified aerobics instructor, and
Wow.
I taught aerobics in a small town in Texas, in a small gym, and I learned a ton from that. Went to teach aerobics on a Air Force base in Korea for a summer. Again, learned a ton from that. I learned a ton, and I had a blast. And you can just take a summer and do something a little different. I mean, you can't take 2 years off at any old time and do any random stuff. But then again, some people do. There's enough variability in the system that not going a straight path is not necessarily, again, a disaster. I think if people feel that it's a disaster, that somehow, it's it's just unfixable, that's really depressing. But if you feel like, okay, well, let's try this instead. So my I mean, my family knows, because I'm French originally, so système débrouille, it's like everything's like, okay, we'll see where we have it. Figure something out. So everybody knows that in the household.
Yeah, and I guess I was also thinking in your talk, so even if there is a dream job and you do have a dream job, I think it's possible that you come across obstacles you didn't expect because you didn't know that was part of your job description. And in your talk, you discuss a student that you had in your class, but you didn't quite know how to sort of manage or talk to, and maybe that is part of the job description, but I'm sure it's still a struggle to manage some whole other person. And I'm curious how you dealt with that ultimately, and whether those challenges continue as you continue your work as a professor, and your thoughts about that.
Yeah. So I think that, I hinted at it, but that was definitely another big failure my first term teaching, was that I had a student in my class who clearly was really struggling mentally, to the point where, I was noticing it because of the disruptions to my class. But of course, it's been something that he was experiencing all the time. And I think I did the right thing first, which is I tried to approach him directly and see, whether we could have a dialogue, and he completely avoided it. And then I think, went to my colleagues, who sort of knew that the student had been acting in a very unusual fashion, but, didn't think it rose to the level of the concern I had. I even asked a couple of my colleagues to come to class to observe it themselves. And when they were there, he didn't have that behavior. And then I thought that maybe I was overreacting. And I think I should have listened to my own intuition there. because it turns out that the next term he did have to be hospitalized. He actually was in a very bad way, and to some extent you have you should ask people's advice, but then if you find that it's not working and it's really not that what they think is, or what they see, or what they judge is not your own judgment, then you need to follow your own judgment also. And I should have followed my own judgment. I should have known better. I should have gone to medical and sought him mental health, and trusted what I was seeing versus what other people were seeing.
Yeah, I think that's always hard to take advice from other people who aren't exactly in your situation. And right, in that way, you sort of have to take a stand, even if you're doing this for the first time.
Exactly. No, so I should have no, and the thing is, I thinking back, I knew better. It wasn't that I was ignorant. I had volunteered at a crisis hotline, suicide hotline, for a few years. So it's not like I wasn't equipped to have that awareness. I just I didn't trust my own judgment.
Yeah. So actually, like every time we go back thinking about stories from the past, right? It's easier to understand and try to rationalize what went wrong, what you could do better, right? And in a way, try to find find a way out for next time, right? But something that I'm really curious about, if you want to share, you shared a lot about this idea, this metaphor of like the obstacle, okay? That you didn't have to refuse the obstacle, okay? You need to face the problem, you need to face the obstacle and try to overcome it. But is there any episode of your life, small or big, that you can think of where you actually refused the obstacle because you were scared about something, or you just didn't feel like, oh, if I try this, I'm gonna fail so bad that it would be irreversible, so I'm not even doing it, or I'm just no, it's too far from what I am. Like, I know that you went pretty far. You already mentioned you changed, basically your first job was far from your PhD, but like something that scared you to the point that you really refused the obstacle. And what is your memory of that moment? We all have a moment like that.
Yeah. No, we all. So by the way, you also need to know when to refuse the obstacle, because sometimes there's a good reason, or it's not worth the effort. I mean, I remember being a kid and going on the high dive board, and I was a swimmer, and my dad was a diver, and he wanted to show me how to dive, and I didn't want to dive. And finally, I did, and I didn't breathe enough for diving, and it was horrible, from the high dive. It was just, I hated it. And I was like, I am never doing that again. Like, I have gone over the obstacle. It's like, no more high diving for me. And so, it was like, I didn't like it. And it was, again, the facile sort of Hollywood approach would be, oh, and then she discovered she could do it. It's like, I can do it, and I really don't want to. And so, I remember just vividly, it's just like, oh, that horrible feeling. So the things that is just, don't like. I think, there's one thing to say, okay, I'd like to try this. I realize it's a bit risky. I think I can manage the risk. As you said, I have a plan B. If it doesn't work out, it's not a disaster, and let me see where it goes, versus just doing things, just because they don't they feel difficult, right? So definitely doing things just because they feel difficult is, I don't think is a way to go.
No.
And by the way, that's also advice I give students, because sometimes, they get very caught up in a problem. And I go, look, you have to know how to judge risk. This isn't going to go anywhere, most likely. And then, you're going to end up, and I remember telling one of my students who's really getting caught up in this problem, I was like, look, so many people have gone down that, and you can go and try to do your thesis on this problem. And, I'll come back in 4 years and you'll still be in your office. Your beard will have grown down to your feet, and you'll be feeding mice that you'll have given names to. I mean, this is just not, if you really want to do it, I'll support you, but I really think it's a bad idea. So, it's also, some things are not just difficult. The difficult are not worth it. That's, you also, I think, would be foolish to just go, oh, I can do it. I can manage only if you want to, only if you think you can manage the risk, and only if, you think that it's a risk worth taking.
Absolutely. So, Jenny, maybe we have a question from the audience.
Yeah, it looks like we have a question from Therese. Sorry if I'm butchering the pronunciation. The question is, all this research responsibility that you have can require a lot of time. So how do you manage time for work, for family, and also for yourself?
That's a very good question. It's a very imprecise and messy business. I think the main thing is it ebbs and flows. I find that, I do a little bit of everything every day. But I also recognize that there'll be times where, there's going to be very intense work. There'll be times when I just really need some time out to just spend some time with my husband or my kids, that I have to, that you're having to negotiate with yourself and with the others in your life all the time. But, as long as you do it, I think, kindly, then that includes you being kind to yourself too, then I think it works out. But it is not, there's no formula. It's very intuitive. Sometimes it doesn't work. But, most of the time it does.
Speaking of family, I also had a question sort of following up on the talk too. I think that there are aspects of family that are constantly in flux. One thing you did mention that was manageable in the talk was you could arrange for someone to take your daughter to her daycare. Things like logistical things like that can be maybe tackled more easily. But there are also interpersonal issues. Things may come up with your children. They might be acting, in ways you don't understand with your partners. A lot of different things can happen with your family. How do you go about managing that really private and personal aspect of your life?
I think this, again, the sometimes you don't, I think that's the thing. And I think that's the case for everybody, no matter what their job is. You're not going to be able to manage all the aspects in your family life satisfactorily. Again, things change, things may look bad right now and then they look better later, and vice versa. But again, having a little bit of perspective is very helpful. The fact that, kids are their own person. Also, sometimes that they'll have to do their own failures. Because it's one thing to go, well, I failed at doing this, and okay, pick myself up and dust myself off. It's more tempting to go, don't do that, and I'm just gonna watch Yeah.
Yeah.
What can you do, right? But of course, you can't entirely do that. You know, you have to feel that you intervene. It's not. It's tricky. It's tricky,
Mhm.
but I don't think it's any less tricky whether you have a job or not. You know, I think that that's one of the things that I figured out is, you know, I don't feel that, say, my friends who maybe didn't pursue a career or pursued the less time consuming career, it's not clear to me that they feel that they're managing it any better. That was something I learned. So, you know, because I think, you know, there's a bit of a feeling, or whether it's real or a myth or not, that, you know, well, maybe if I did something completely different, you know, I might be able to manage some of these aspects better. It could be, you know, certainly on an individual basis, but certainly on a global basis, I don't see it, at least from the people around me.
Right. So in some ways, there are always aspects of your life that you know you won't have control over. And that's not even part of the list of things you're going to work on. Yeah.
Exactly.
Mhm.
I mean, I think one of the great things about having an enjoyable job is, if anything, it's probably the aspect of your life where you have the most control.
Yeah, that's true.
Well, it's
That's
still
true.
not complete by any means. And certainly, you know, having the ability to fend for yourself just as a human being and provide for your children, that's really very, very empowering. So,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah, actually, Muriel, like all the times that in each of these like things that you were talking about, there's a lot of emotions involved, right? Like with your family, etc. Like the involvement and the engagement at the emotional level is extremely important. And when you were also talking about your students before and your postdocs, etc. Like and now you relate to when they have difficulties, right? Difficulties can happen to your loved ones in the family, but also to your students, postdocs, etc. When you have 10, 15, 20, maybe 50 people, I don't know how big is your network of people that look at you, probably 2,000 people that look at you as a mentor, and you're really connected also emotionally. Like when they're failing, when they're struggling, when they have a problem, you as a mentor, how do you process that struggle that other people have, and how much you allow yourself to be emotionally involved, which eventually you also bring it back home. It doesn't, it can really hurt you, it can really eat you from inside. Like it's something that I really feel, for instance, a lot when I, every time I care a lot about people that I have around me, without naming any specific type of role or people in my life, like that really hits me a lot. And it's like, how do you manage others people's failure when you really care about them, others people's struggles when you're a mentor for them? And how can you be of best support? And how can you also not allow that to fail you eventually as a person?
Yeah. I think, I mentioned that I had volunteered at a crisis suicide hotline. That was a really, really good training for that. They trained you in that.
Yeah.
Because of course, you can just get, just flattened, just, steamrolled over by, the stuff that you end up discussing with people over the phone for hours, and, I think it's important again to think, well, am I saying something that's helpful? Am I helping them? Are they better off with what I'm doing or saying to them or not? And then if you look at it that way, then it's great. I mean, sometimes also, yeah, you're watching, basically it's like a train wreck. It's like, you tell somebody something and they go ahead and do it and it doesn't work out. And then they come back and it's like, it didn't work out. And, you can't, you have to accept it and help them accept it. But yeah, and also sometimes you have to say no. I mean, I remember just recently I got an email from from a colleague saying, I have this former student, she really needs a mentor, will you be her mentor? And I said, I can't, I get too many of these requests. I can't be mentor to the world. And, one of the things I did in my professional society is actually start a mentoring program, because you need to be able to have, some sort of multiplier. So, I started a mentoring program where basically, mentors took 2 or 3 mentees, and then the mentees would say, they basically were committing to becoming mentors later in their career. And that way you can multiply it. And I had, fantastic mentees who are all friends of mine now and have gone on to be fantastic mentors. So, it was really, really successful, but you need to leverage it also. And so sometimes you'll say, look, I'm sorry, I can't. But, I get a lot of that, especially, with like, oh, we don't have any female faculty, would you be someone's mentor? And like, well, go ahead and hire some.
Actually,
your hiring committee is not my problem.
No, actually, that brings me to something I really wanted to ask you, as someone who's worked as part of a lot of institutions and companies. I feel like sometimes it's harder for groups of people or institutions to recognize their failures and address it.
Oh, yeah.
And you also lead many groups. How, like, one thing that you just brought up about hiring more women, that's an institutional problem that a lot of people have trouble tackling.
Yes.
Yeah, how do you think about that in your own group and in the groups that you've been in where you weren't necessarily the leader?
We probably need another hour for that. I think it's very important to just, I mean, one of the things that I think for any of these failures, it's like, if you don't recognize that you screwed up or that it didn't go right, you're never going to learn, right? So the first has to be recognition. So definitely looking at numbers, trying to do a postmortem of what went wrong. That's very difficult. People really, really don't want to look at what went wrong. Because there's usually some blame to be had, and supposed to say, well, we sort of didn't do a good job. And yeah, we probably shouldn't have so-and-so interviewing people or selecting or whatever. These are not the kinds of things any institution wants to do. So those are very difficult conversations. On the other hand, if you don't have them, then you don't get out of that. So I think it's a difficult thing as an individual to go, okay, again, when things go wrong, it's seldom a single thing. It's usually a combination of aspects. But even say, okay, this is the things that really, that was on me. These were maybe not on me or partially, or this is totally outside my control. And but it's not an easy thing to do in an institutional setting, because it feels like you're blaming, and sometimes you are, to be fair, but those are very difficult conversations to have. But yeah, institutional failure is always a difficult topic to tackle, whether it be in a professional society, in a company, in a research group, in a lab, at the level of an institution. It's not an easy thing to have that conversation with oneself and with one's peers.
Yeah, I think it makes sense what you said though about robust reflection and assessment, after as a group, and also being comfortable in some ways with dealing with accountability, your own, or sometimes even letting other people know of their accountability.
Yeah, exactly. And I think there's, I think it's important to be able to tell people, hey, look, you screwed up. And to tell, I screwed up. Me, by myself, I screwed up. It's important to be able to have that.
Yeah, and we all believe, and that's also one of the reasons why we started Fail in the first place, is that we all have the responsibility to bring in our labs, in our workplaces, in our families, in our circle of friends, bring a little bit of this example of like making sure that people feel comfortable about sharing when things didn't go right. Like if you feel like you need to hide because the group is watching, or just you don't acknowledge, or sometimes you hiding a failure, hiding something that you did wrong, also can hurt somebody else. Like you really need to say that, like say that, and but we need to create the environment for people to feel safe in saying and sharing about it. And I think we all have in part the responsibility to bring a little bit of that in all the communities that we are part of. And maybe that's how, with the support of leadership and all, for instance, all the speakers and people that come to speak at Fail, it's that, like it's inspiring through leaders, people that students and most other people look at as role models, to really bring a change in all the communities and realities where people are involved. Yeah. So, and I think this is extremely important, that we all need to do our part, and that's how the system changes eventually. It's not just a single wolf that decides, oh, I want to change the world. That's likely not going to go anywhere. I'm not saying that the chances is zero, but likely not going to go anywhere. It needs to be an effort of everybody. And actually, I wanted to use there's a comment from Stacy that I think it really fits what we just said with you. Like I said, Muriel is wonderful. Having a down-to-earth perspective is encouraging to others. And I think like this is exactly like one of the core aspects, is really sharing things as they are. We don't need to make it too bright, too colorful, just saying everything is perfect, because it's not, and describe life and things as they are, and contribute with this to make a change in a way. So I think, Jenny, I don't know if you have any final remarks, or like Muriel, if you have any final remarks.
No, thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. It's always I love talking to you guys, and this is such a fantastic forum. Really, I'm so impressed that you guys had this idea and are following up with so much creativity and so much warmth and enthusiasm and intelligence. It's lovely. It really is.
Yeah,
Thank
I
you so
also
much.
want to echo everything Francesco said. It occurs to me now that we didn't even really highlight the kind of influence you have in your field, the work you've done, but I'm sure the people watching are aware of that. And again, for speaking to us frankly about your challenges, how you deal with things. Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. And like for everybody here that is watching now or in the future, feel free to subscribe to our channels. We have Facebook, we have YouTube, Instagram, and we just launched a new podcast platform. So if you're like into podcasts, you can go on Spotify, you can go on iTunes, and we're going to release every week a new talk or a new episode. So make sure to follow us and engage with us as much as possible to bring a change in society and beyond, everywhere. Really, thank you so much for being with us today, and have a nice rest of the day and evening, depending on where you are in the world. Bye-bye.